That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Every Breath You Take, the world premiere of the third film directed by Vaughn Stein, which Vertical Entertainment will be releasing April 2nd, 2021.
This person's first film.
It's a film that I really don't like, which I've said before, called Terminal, a 2018 title starring Margot Robbie.
That's right.
His second film was Inheritance, which we reviewed from 2020, and here's another pandemic feature from Vaughn Stein.
Okay, the basic story. This is a suspense thriller a la all of those 90s, like Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
That sweet spot of the late 80s, early 90s where white people are accosted by some menacing force. What?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
The basic story is there is a psychiatrist named Phillip, who's played by Casey Affleck. Mm-hmm. He's married to a lady named Grace, played by
Michelle Monaghan.
And Phillip has a daughter named Lucy, who's played by
India Eisley.
Grace is her stepmother. But anyway, Phillip is a psychiatrist. The opening of the film is we see Grace driving with their son in the car when she's involved in an accident and her son dies.
Which we don't know that right away.
We don't know that right away, but he dies. So their relationship is strained because Phillip blames Grace on some level for the death of their son.
And as we come to find, 3 years have passed since that moment.
Yes. But Phillip's working. We see him with a patient named Daphne. Mm-hmm. Daphne has, her background is she comes from a very wealthy family and she has a history of mental illness in her family, and she's also struggles severely. So much so that Dr. Clark, so Phillip is Dr. Phillip Clark. Dr. Clark's methods have not proven effective, like medication and treatment in psychiatric facilities. So when we see her in a session with him, she's explaining like, thanks to your treatment of me, like I am so much better. It gave me the strength to leave my abusive boyfriend. Okay. Then we cut to Dr. Clark also is like a professor at some university. Mm-hmm. And he's presenting a case study for a woman named Mary. Mary is really Daphne. And he tells this audience full of students and faculty that his unconventional method of treating her is he told her all of his business. Mm-hmm. All of his secrets, like literally everything.
He treated therapy as like from Working Girl. It's a two-way street, Tess.
Okay. Later, and so people are in shock. His superior, Vanessa, who's played by
Veronica Ferres, who also executive produced this film.
Oh, she did? Yeah. Okay. She's like, are you sure about this? Like, maybe you shouldn't, like, take her off her medication. We then see police come to, Daphne calls Dr. Clark, saying, "Oh my God, I just found my best friend's dead. I'm really upset." And Dr. Clark says, "We're meeting tomorrow. You better make your appointment. We're gonna get over this for however long for as long as it takes. We're gonna get you through this." But then that night, the police come knocking on Dr. Clark's door, saying that your patient killed herself. And we came to find you because you're listed on her phone as like her emergency medical contact.
While he's having dinner with his superior.
We're going to get into how crazy that is.
Uh-huh.
He shows up to the murder scene or suicide scene, and that's when Dr. Clark meets Daphne's brother James, who's played by
Sam Claflin.
Okay, to wrap this shit up, James, the brother, so he has an interaction with Dr. Clark. It's very brief. But he shows up at Dr. Clark's house the next day because he found his address online. Because he wants to give him like a book or a journal that belonged to Daphne. And when he gets to the house, Dr. Clark's wife Grace is like, "Oh, come on in. You should have dinner with us. We ordered too much Thai food." Mm-hmm. So he sits his ass down, and immediately we can see that the teenage daughter, Lucy, and Grace, Dr. Clark's wife, are really interested in James. Mm-hmm. So therein begins this sort of like web where James is seducing the daughter and the wife. James is also writing the board of medicine or the medical board and the university trying to get Dr. Clark in trouble for his treatment methods. So it would seem that he's trying to like destroy Dr. Clark's life because he blames him for the death of his sister. It culminates with James ends up having like a sexual affair with Grace, and he kidnaps her kind of, and takes her back to the spot where the accident occurred where her son died, and it would seem that he wants to like get into a car accident to kill her, but he doesn't. During that time, Dr. Clark had been following them, so he's able to kind of save her, bring her back home. An important plot point is when James is at dinner with the family, he says he's a writer, and Dr. Clark goes on the interwebs to find his book, and for some reason has searched high and low and cannot order this book. So he goes to his superior Vanessa's house to meet with her husband, who does something in business, we don't know, to get the book. And he says, oh, I can get you the book, but it's going to take 1 to 2 weeks.
It's a very small British publication. Yeah.
So of course we're like, well, you know, this book's going to show back up. So it does. The book shows up, and we find out, well, after James kidnaps Grace, Dr. Clark saves his wife, he gets the book, but in between the kidnapping and the book, James admits himself into a psychiatric hospital for treatment. Okay. When Dr. Clark gets the book, he sees that the author, James, the man who showed up is not James, because there's a picture on the back of the book of the actual James, Daphne's brother, and this man is not it. So we find out that the man who's been doing all this is the abusive ex-boyfriend of the dead patient. And he blames Dr. Clark because he thinks all psychiatrists are quacks and frauds.
Charlatans and frauds.
Charlatans and frauds. So the climax is James, whose real name is Eric, because he's the ex-boyfriend. So now Eric goes back to Dr. Clark's house to, I guess, kill whomever's there. So a fight ensues with Dr. Clark, Grace, and Lucy. And Grace ends up killing Eric by bludgeoning him to death with an ice skate that belonged to their dead son. The end. Okay. The last Casey Affleck movie we reviewed was called
Light of My Life, which he directed.
Which the title of the video is like Rich White Man Lost in the Woods or something that I wrote. And that video got so many negative comments because basically I'm saying this story is so stupid, it's just like rich white people shit, that I had to turn off the comments section. Then who directed this?
Vaughn Stein.
The Inheritance movie we reviewed, I also had a similar critique of like, this just seems like rich white people shit. And now this movie from this man and Casey Affleck combined is like super rich white people shit. Because so much of this story makes no sense to me.
Yes, there are so many, the suspension of disbelief, we might as well be on Mars. The choices that these people are making.
I feel very poor because I guess I just don't understand how things work.
No, this movie is just completely illogical and on many fronts. Starting with the title, like, what a waste of the Police song for the title of this.
I don't even understand what the title relates to in this story.
A better title would have been, because a repeated phrase that Daphne and Eric shared with each other was something about the deepest hurt you've ever felt. Like, that should have been the title, because that's what's referenced in the film. Something like that.
Sure.
Every breath you take has nothing to do with...
Yeah. Should I just go down my list really fast so I can get it over with? I think the actor who played Daphne looked like the bride of Chucky.
Like the doll, not...
The doll, not
Jennifer Taylor.
No, not Jennifer. She'd be so lucky.
That hair. That was Emily Allen Lynn.
Okay, there could be a game in this movie if you count the number of times we see Grace in the swimming pool. They have a they're in Washington, like upstate Washington.
It's set in upstate Washington, but it was shot in British Columbia, which is funny because they keep making allusions to taking family vacation in British Columbia.
That's right, they do. Dr. Clark has a beautiful home. His wife Grace is a real estate agent. Beautiful home, beautiful pool. And we see her swimming like 5 times. For what reason, I do not know. But if you count the number of times we see her swimming with the number of shots where either someone is getting into a car, getting out of a car, sitting in the car, standing by the car, driving the car, it's a lot. Like 50% of this movie takes place in or around a car.
It's very a vehicular-inspired film, yeah.
Yes.
There's probably more scenes in cars in this than Cronenberg Crash. Actually.
Probably. When James shows up to the house and then gets invited into dinner, and the way Grace and Lucy are acting towards him, my note was, ladies love cool James.
Oh, God.
He's not, I mean...
I like Sam Claflin.
He's fine. I mean, he could get my number, but I'm just saying he's not like... I mean, the way they're acting is like, these bitches are thirsty as hell. Mm-hmm. And I understand Grace is like neglected by her husband because he blames her and there's distance. But also, she's like a professional person. Like, she works. She's a real estate agent. She's out in these streets. The likelihood that she could meet someone is pretty high. Yeah. So for her to act like this is the... I mean, she was acting like one of those mole women in Kimmy Schmidt. Like, oh my God, a man, an adult man. And then the young girl, we didn't mention, Lucy is home. Again, more rich people stuff because she's home and everyone's like, what are you doing home? Because you should be in boarding school. Because there's another female student character who someone else asked, like, oh, why are you home? Shouldn't you be off in school? But Lucy is home because she was expelled for doing cocaine at school.
In science lab, yeah.
The way that girl is played...
You see her eye makeup and you're like, oh, she's got problems.
Yeah, the way she styled her aesthetic, I hated her hair, but the way she's styled is like, oh, she's troubled. Mm-hmm. Which I thought was kind of lame. I have a note that this is just a boring version of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle.
Yeah, it very much is like those... Hand That Rocks the Cradle, I think, is a good template because the De Mornay character, ingratiated herself in this family with vengeance on her mind, but we know immediately why.
Yes.
And this movie is playing games with us with this very flaccid twist that doesn't work.
Dr. Clark's superior, Vanessa, they have a very... They have a professional relationship, but they also seem to be close friends because they say that. Mm-hmm. But the chemistry between those two is so... It does not read as like these two people would actually be friends.
Right.
And her concern for him seems... I like that lady, the actor.
Ferres?
Yes.
She was just in that film Crisis with Gary Oldman and Armie Hammer.
Yes, which I also didn't care for, but...
yeah.
But she's great on screen. I love her accent.
And a Werner Herzog film called Salt and Fire, which is...
But don't you agree? They did not seem like they would be like...
Buddies? No.
Buddies.
No. In fact, what this... Casey Affleck is playing a person who's very inert. Like, he's talking about all these secrets that he divulged to Daphne that we never really find out about. And it would have been much more interesting that we gave him some kind of transgression beyond that. Like, maybe I think this movie should have been called, like, Crossing Boundaries or something. And because they all are doing...
Borders.
But it would have been more interesting if he had kind of a more ambiguous situation with his boss, which would have really beefed up that scene where he tells this auditorium that I shared everything with this patient of mine, and where she could have gone like, everything? You share everything with her?
Yeah.
It just would have made their situation seem much more exciting.
Because there's nothing exciting about this story. I presume they're in a smaller town. They're near water, so it's an affluent area, but it's a smaller place, and he's a well-known person. So James is taking Lucy out, like romancing her. We see Grace out with James, mm-hmm. and at one point Lucy's at like a bar, and she sees Vanessa, her dad's superior, walk in, and she tells James like, "Oh, we have to go. A friend of the family's here." And it just seems like that behavior seems so reckless. Like, don't these people know that it's a small town and they'll be seen? That was very confusing to me.
There's so many clunky things in this, starting with, they introduced, James Flagg is this, he's published this unsuccessful first novel, and Casey Affleck cannot find it on the internet, apparently didn't try on eBay. To have that be the mechanism for us finding out that he's not the brother, he's the boyfriend, is so unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I think this film could have gone so much deeper. It could have been so much more perverse. Like to me, a more perverse twist would have been like he's the boyfriend and the brother.
Anything
like,
really.
And you could have gone to this really weird kind of taboo erotic neo-noir feel with it.
I think the most laughable scene in this movie is Dr. Clark suspects Grace, his wife, is like having an affair with James, so he's following her around town. And initially, when he follows her, he sees that, oh, she's going to like an open house. But he continues and sees that she goes to James' house. And he sits like in front of the house, out of eyesight. And as the audience, we see them having an affair. He has like a dream sequence where he like walks in with like a tire iron to, I guess, hurt someone, but he doesn't. He just sits in the car, and he has like a tantrum where he's hitting the steering wheel and he breaks his own glasses. Yeah. That was pretty ridiculous.
Don't know how he's going to drive home. Oh, well, also the fact that she is hired as the realtor to sell the dead sister's house, which is also a conflict of interest. And it's like, but why? You're rich. You don't need to do that.
Also, like, as someone who used to be in a relationship with a doctor, like, number one rule is, even if your significant other is telling you about patients, which they shouldn't be, you know that you would never, like, cross that boundary and interact with these people. The fact that this lady would invite, like, and I know that James is not a patient, but, like, he's the brother of the dead patient. Why would you want to socialize with him and then, like, agree to, like, work with him selling his home? It just seems so ridiculous. Like a stretch.
And speaking of medical facilities, when he checks himself in for his psychotic episode and a colleague calls Casey Affleck and says, James Flagg is here, but that's not him. So did he not show ID to be checked into this
I guess when you're
facility?
rich and you can pay cash, you don't have to. I don't know. I thought Grace looked like Justine Bateman. So there's another scene where Grace... So after...
Michelle Monaghan's in it. She's in a ton of stuff. We just reviewed the Craft Legacy. She's the mom in that.
Oh, I don't remember her.
Well, she's in it.
Well, I mean...
Anyhow.
I'm sure that's true. After Dr. Clark confronts his wife and says, like, I know you cheated on me with him, but I understand because I pushed you away by blaming you for the death of our son. So then it seems like, okay, well, good, we got over that. Grace is out running her errands or whatever the hell she's doing, and her car won't start. Mm-hmm. And her immediate response, and she's in like a late model Mercedes. Mm-hmm. Her immediate thought is to get out of the car, open the hood, knowing damn well she doesn't know what's under the hood, because she just seems confused. And then James mysteriously appears and offers to help her. And she says, yeah, because I need to go to the pharmacy and pick up a prescription.
For Lucy, but it's like, well, that can wait. You've ignored her through the
Oh my God. But, like, doesn't she have AAA? They have money. Like, don't you have AAA? Or certainly, like, a late model Mercedes would have roadside assistance. So that was so out of control for me. Again, I guess when you have money, you don't know how things work. I don't know. Okay, you mentioned when the doctor from the psychiatric facility calls Dr. Clark about James. But then, when Dr. Clark finds out James is really Eric, he calls that same doctor back. And that phone call was so stupid.
Yes.
It's like, wouldn't you need to call the police. You need to...
Well, he calls that doctor and he goes to look for Claflin in his room and he's murdered an orderly. He didn't have to check himself in there in the first place.
Right, you're not, like, you don't have a court order to stay in this. You could have just walked out. You checked yourself in, you can check yourself out. You didn't have to kill someone.
So I was reading, David Murray was the screenwriter, and it's his first produced screenplay, but this was originally going to be made back in 2012 with Harrison Ford and Zac Efron attached. For whatever reason, unbeknownst to myself, it was shelved and revived, of course, recently. But there's a lot of retooling that needs to happen in this because it doesn't work for how the world works currently.
And there's no suspense.
Well, that too.
Ugh, I don't know what else to say. Like, I'm just shocked that, because I think the film looks good, the cast is good, so I was expecting something very different, and it just kind of middles along until James/Eric just kills someone, and then Grace ends up killing him. Like, it just escalates so quickly.
Yeah.
Because if James' intention is to ruin Dr. Clark's life, he doesn't do a very good job. He just writes a couple letters to the medical board, and then there's a little heat on Dr. Clark, but he doesn't. It doesn't seem like he's that concerned or that he's actually going to lose his medical license. So that hasn't like sort of folded. And then yes, he has sex with the man's wife, but then he acknowledges like, yeah, I mean, I pushed you away, so let's call it even and move on. So what exactly did James accomplish? Except to stir the pot a little.
Well, he doesn't even really ruin the daughter per se.
And then the daughter, he just kind of gets her hopes up because she says, I want to go away with you. And he says, yeah, meet me on this night and we're going to go away together. And then he like ghosts her. So it's like, okay, so you just broke her heart. Like, I guess. But he really doesn't do a lot of damage.
No.
I guess I kept referencing The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And there's so many moments that are like, WTF. Like, that make the story so good.
Or kind of like that emasculation of Kurt Russell in Unlawful Entry.
Something.
Yeah.
Anything. But this story is like, there's nothing that really felt dire or...
No.
And I didn't care.
I think Claflin's well cast. He's usually quite good as a villain. I don't think you saw the Nightingale, the Jennifer Kent film.
Well, this video's long. So what else do you want to say?
Stein brought along his Inheritance crew. Marlon Espino does the... score, and Michael Merriman is the cinematographer, who also shot the music video for Rain on Me.
Rain on Me?
Ariana Grande, Lady Gaga.
Oh, okay.
You're familiar with that song?
I know that song, but
I think if we're charting a progression of Vaughn Stein's cinematic contributions thus far, I think Every Breath You Take is a little better than Inheritance and certainly better than Terminal. But overall, this was a mess of not epic proportions, but disappointing.
If it's streaming for free on some platform you pay a subscription for, I would check it out just because your blood pressure will go up a little because you're kind of annoyed, so that's worth something. What would you give this movie?
1.5 out of 5.
I would give it 1.5 out of 5 as well. Thank you.
Bye.